Hey Tyler, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How's it going, Dharmesh?
Doing very well. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about data governance strategy. Right. Just before we get started, I want you to sort of give a little bit of introduction to your background and why we can talk. Why I think you're probably one of the best persons on the team to talk about this. And before we go down that path, for those who are new, uh, just something about us is we are a platform that is focused on shortening the time it takes for teams to build their go-to-market plan and keep it aligned to all the changes that happen in the field. These are some of the customers that we support, but we're not here to talk about the platform or anything else. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing anything here and just it's Tyler, your time. So quickly, you want to give a recap of your role and your background?
Sure. I'll go a ways back, but not too far back. But basically, I had spent about 10 plus years as just an account manager, salesperson, different roles, different industries. Came into tech, started as an SDR, moved into being an account executive, then managed an SDR team. Um, and then that's kind of when I discovered, like, oh, okay, this is great and all, but ops is where I really want to be, and that's my heart and soul is in the sales ops world. So I made the transition to full cast, and that is really where we're starting. We're with these customers that had data issues. They had contracted with us to help them with their data quality issues and get things cleaned up. And so for several years and still today, we're cleaning data in many different instances. And this is kind of where I've like seen all of the pitfalls and all of the different things that could possibly go wrong with data within a Salesforce environment, and kind of just been taking notes and coalescing this information into one cohesive, I don't know, strategy or just a policy or whatever you want to call it. But it's been nice because I've had the background of what it's like to be on the sales side of things and in dealing with bad data or missing data, and then also on the flip side of like really how do you attempt to fix this problem, or at least get it as the data as clean as possible.
So let's go dive right straight in. We hear from everybody like we don't have a data strategy, or you know we our data is not clean. That's the number one thing I hear. Right, people have all gone to extreme measures, saying I'm going to restart my Salesforce instance all over again. So let's start from the basics, right? In your experience, why does it matter to have a data governance strategy first?
It matters because if you don't, then you'll never actually patch any of these issues. You'll just complain about them for forever. You'll be in a reactive state, really. Like when it as soon as you take the time to set a strategy in place, to think about your policy, how you're going to clean the data, how you're going to maintain it, etc. You've become proactive about the problem rather than just constantly dealing with tickets coming in from reps saying this employee count's wrong, or why is this account in this segment, or there's 4 duplicates, etc.
So that's a very interesting what you just said, right? Because like employee counts, segments, and all those are constantly changing, right? Where the company will start, right? You're like a 5-person sales team, right? The way you go to market is different. You become a 20-person sales team. You have a little more processes, more rigor. You're now a 1,000-person sales team, and you have more finite, defined go-to-market plans, right? And I think each of those stakeholders at every stage requires a different level of data insight. And what I've kind of think is uh, when you don't have a strategy that scales consistently, you fill it up by, hey, I need a new field over here. I need another field over there. and you kind of build it up, and before you know it, you lose it. Am I correct? Is that what you've seen as well?
Well, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, as you grow, you add fields and things like this. I think for me, the way I think about it though is there's this core like foundational set of things that you need to put in place that you follow to a T, and it's really the data that you care the most about. And typically, like the way you would find out about, well, what data do I care about in the system is really asking yourself, like, what kind of data do I need to um, complete my plan? Like when I'm doing my go-to-market design every year, what's that data in the account object or an account record that I need to have so that I can plan effectively? What do reps need to do their jobs? Are they going to need to have specific data that's unique to your industry so that they could go out and sell to an account or a company? Does finance need something specific in that account record? And so you'll want to ask yourself those questions to identify that. As a company grows and scales, that's going to change. So that's the point of like the policy and things like that, is to have that conversation to continually either add on, adjust, remove, whatever it is, to be proactive about it.
So where do you start? Like, let's say I want to start. Like somebody comes to you got somebody comes to you, hey, we got a mess over here. Where do you start putting together your data strategy from?
You blow everything up. I'm kidding. You were right. You just get a new Salesforce instance like once a year, right? You start at the policy phase. So there's a whole process that you'll want to go through, and it's like, if you've never done this before and you're going out, our data quality is terrible. We've got to make improvements. We're just putting patches in place. You need to start with a policy, and really the point of the policy is to just have a conversation amongst all the key stakeholders, and put all of that, everything that everyone's agreeing to, in one central location, which is just a document. I mean, a policy is really, really boring. It's the rules of the road. It's, when we are driving a car and we stop at a stop sign, that is a policy that we follow. And we know to stop at the stop sign, but somewhere there's definitely some traffic law that says it in a piece of paper, which is exactly what we're doing with our data policy. So establishing a data policy is really important, and you'll want to first start with identifying the key stakeholders that you need to loop in on that. You want to identify, why, the goals and the principles of why you're doing this. So what is our goal with this data policy, and what are some of the principles that we'll follow, and continue to going back to identifying the people that need to be involved. So you can find people that are responsible. You need to identify who's going to be accountable, people that need to be informed about it, etc. There's all those different frameworks for identifying stakeholders and things.
We put a RACI model together.
Yeah.
For all the stakeholders that are involved across the go-to-market life cycle: sales, marketing, finance, the people who take dependencies on this. Now, do you do that for everything in Salesforce, or do we start with a foundational building block objects that we have, like accounts, contacts? Because in my mind, like accounts are accounts are most stable, contacts a little less, leads are extremely volatile, right? And so based on that stability model, you kind of look at that as a building block for the framework.
You brought up a really good point, and I was actually just going to clarify this, that everything that I've been talking to up to this point has really been focused on the account object. So if you are continuing to build that out and looking at lead and contact, those are probably going to be different stakeholders. There might be a lot of similarities there, but you'll want to identify the differences between the two and treat them as separate.
Yeah. So we will put together a RACI model. We'll define the policy. Now, the thing is, what's interesting, and I think there's a question here from Chris as well, is do we have a framework for a Series A, Series B, Series C company, right? So at different stages, going back to the stage concept, right? At different stages of the company, you have different go-to-markets, right? And so at each go-to-market informs a different level of policy scrutiny. For example, when you're a Series A company, you could just wing it. At least your ICP is defined to, okay, I can only go after, let's say, the deer size accounts, right? I become a little bigger now. I'm going to go deer and elephants, and they have a different coverage model, right? So do you do you see all those things impacting policy? Because I don't see people really connecting the dots mostly. That's where I've seen the trap is. People think, okay, I just need to add a new field and account object, and they'd look at it account on its own, not looking at the overall go-to-market plan that the company has in terms of coverage models, who's going to cover that, and like how we segmenting, how we creating the territories, all that jazz. Right. So, do you see those as the common pitfalls? I mean, I'll flip it around as the question that I have is specifically, what are the common mistakes that you've seen people make when they start with this defining this policy frameworks?
They don't define it, but I mean, they don't. You don't define anything, right? Coming back to the question with the framework, ideally, it's tied to how you're changing with your go-to-market strategy, right? So as you're raising additional funds, it's usually you're going to be changing your go-to-market. Maybe that's going after international markets. So what are the things you need to think about there? Data sources. Is my current data source great for everything in the US and doesn't have great coverage in EMEA? Then I've got to identify a new data source. When you introduce that, then you have to think about prioritizing that data source. How is that enriching fields into the account? And those are the things that kind of come from that. Additionally, as you're growing, let's say from SMB up to enterprise, there'll be different data set, like data pieces that you're caring about. So that might be employees, or that might be revenue, things like that. And that is stuff that would cause you to start to reevaluate the policy.
Yeah. So going back to answer Chris's question, the framework starts with really understanding a go-to-market at that stage. Based on the go-to-market, you have to look at those standard objects, at least the core ones, accounts and contacts to start with, and figure out what is my policy for creating an account? What is my policy for, what is the common minimum data that I need for an account? And that'll grow. You brought up an interesting point around data providers, which is, people buy there are lots of data providers out there, right? And what I've seen is they fall into this trap that I'm going to buy a data provider and I'll have everything. That generally is not the case, correct?
Yep.
And it is a root cause for a lot of data issues, is all the data that we're getting, right? So how do you resolve for that? I mean, like, people want to segment, and I mean the whole things that are like, I have an account hierarchy that gets impacted based on data providers, right? I have duplicate accounts all over the place. So what are the kind of policies you think a company should look to invest in building?
Interesting.
So you can have a lot of policies, but the core ones that you'll say, absolute must-have policies before you even think about anything else.
I think what would be helpful here is to go into and just talk a little bit about what's a key aspect of this data policy. I talked a lot about data policy from a high level, but when we think about actually creating one, what are the things that you need to think about for that go into the policy, right? Yeah. So the first thing, and then maybe we'll answer the question around, like, as we start to add data sources, how do you think about that? But the first thing you want to do is define what an account is to you. Is an account a physical location? Is it a decision-making source? So you need to define that and identify how that is within whatever data source you're using. Identify how you would say that, like, hey, a holding company is not somebody we sell to, so we need to make sure that it doesn't end up in our system. unless we want it for some reason, right? So that's the first place to start. And that definition is going to be unique to pretty much every company because they'll have different ways of how they go to market, how they sell. The next spot is to identify how accounts are being created in the system. And this is going to be the same for like contacts and leads. Are accounts added by SDRs, AEs? Are they added by marketing? Do they get created by your product when people sign up for like a self-serve thing? So you want to identify all those scenarios, and within that each scenario, you'll want to identify who's accountable for that, if there's any reviews that need to be happening. And later on, that's going to be really important as you start to think about plugging holes with like, well, why is there data missing in this account? Like, why is the address not here? And then you'll want to tie that back to, well, it was created through the API from our self-serve and it was allowed through, so we need to figure out how to plug that hole. The next step is identifying data minimums. That is kind of a twofold thing. One, the minimum amount of data just being in the field itself. So I need to have, to build my go-to-market strategy, I need to have the employee count. I need to have a NAICS code. I need to have an address and a name or a website, whatever that might be. That's also going to be unique. And that will change as the company grows. One, going up market and also going internationally. The second piece of the data minimum is also the format. Do you want your states to be abbreviated, like for Washington, WA, or do you want it spelled out Washington? And that's going to be super important to identify, especially with data sources, and they're trying to match to your instance. And if everything is different, and maybe these data sources aren't going to be, like if things are WA and the data source is matching for Washington, it might not match as cleanly as you hope for. And so you'll get a much lower match rate. And it also is really important when it comes to dupes, because as you're running duplicate and you're running duplicate management and things like that, you'll want to make sure all that stuff is similar. The next step is identifying bad accounts or junk accounts, things that don't belong in your system. Everyone's really afraid to get rid of data out of their CRM, but it's super important to do that because it's just cognitive load. They've talked about, the people the hoarders that they save all the stuff, but there's like a lot of cognitive load to like keep this stuff. And as soon as you if like you sell your car, like an old car that's been sitting in the driveway, it just feels like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders. Same thing. When you go delete 1,000 accounts, it feels great.
Yep.
Is this still helpful, Dharmesh? I mean, there's a couple more in here.
No, this is super helpful. So please go ahead. So the question that I have is now, we in ops or the go-to-market planning teams, we will define that data strategy, like I said, at a very granular level, because that's what a policy is. It defines very crisply, this is acceptable, this is not. And let's go back to the account creation scenario, right? Accounts get created either by reps in the field or by an automated machine through an API, like we talked about. And we all know that salespeople we all want to get the least amount of friction in what it takes for me to use my CRM. So I will sometimes put it WA, I might just put it Washington, I might just write international business machines or write IBM, right? So I will do that, and that's not out of control. So how do you enforce that policy? Because it's great to write a policy framework and make it available in a document and socialize it. But then, when the rubber hits the road, all bets are off, especially on sales side, where people are always changing, right? And the new guy might come in and say, hey, I didn't know that there was this policy. So how do you make that policy enforceable?
Validation rules. Validation rules in Salesforce is probably your easiest way. There's also just running reports and data quality checks, so like audits and things like that. It's going to be really hard to if you go with the spell out the state thing, Salesforce gives you the state and country pick list. So implementing that's a really good step because that takes care of that problem. But when it comes to like naming, IBM versus international business machines, that's going to have to be a data, it's just going to either have to be a data quality audit, or you take whatever your data source gives you, which is probably going to be international business machines, which is the legal business name, and you put that into the name of the account.
So let me ask you a very pointed question. So when you are dealing with customers and they are like, we know from two biggest culprits for data quality are account dedupes, for example, right? Who's selling into which accounts is another piece that comes into policy, right? Because of the bad data in accounts, sometimes you have multiple people selling into the same accounts, right? In a team, how do you handle just a scenario like dedupe of accounts or an account hierarchy policy that a customer wants to be applied consistently, right? So how do you do that?
With the duplicates, it starts with making sure your data is clean. It comes back to enforcing on those validation rules, right? If you have data missing in the account because you're not enforcing your data minimums, you're not going to catch them as duplicates, and so then you're going to have already that problem of reps working two accounts, but you don't know that they're two duplicates. But now let's say you've perfected that, and you're now catching these duplicates. There's a ton of tools out there that can catch duplicates, and I'm sure that they're all great. The important piece there in identifying a kind of like a duplicate management strategy is your exceptions. What are my exceptions to the rule of just automatically merging these accounts? And those would be typically scenarios where two different reps, like you mentioned, two different reps that own the same account. So you've got IBM 1 and IBM 2, and you've got an enterprise rep owning one and a strategic rep owning the other. Somebody's going to need to make a decision around who's going to own that account ultimately. And so you don't want to automatically merge that record. You need to make a decision. Same thing with like two customers.
That's a policy that you're defining that it has to, right? Okay.
Yep.
So go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, you want to go through that process around what are the ones that we need to review, and then what are the ones that we just like don't care about. So maybe we have like a user that we dump accounts into that's just like a holding pen, like Salesforce admin, and we just, if two accounts are owned by that Salesforce admin, let's just merge them. Or if they're owned by the same rep, let's just merge them together, and let's not like waste our time and energy reviewing every single one.
Okay. So in your case, when you're supporting these customers, you automated those policies on the platform. That's how you're doing that. But if you don't, in the absence of a policy automated through us, you would use a validation rule of sorts that
yes, we have that ability to automate the dupes unless it meets an exception rule in our platform. But for customers that aren't using our platform, let's say they're using demand tools or Ringlead, I think is another one. And if they're using those, it's likely that they're going to have somebody manually review everything and check for those exceptions. And so they'll go, okay, I got this list of 80 dupes. 10 of them are exceptions. So I'll merge the 70 and then take the 10. And then whoever is identified as the person that needs to make this decision on this, I'll send those out. And then they'll make the decision, and then we'll come back and merge those.
So apart from dupes, what are the other big data quality issues that you've seen most customers struggle with consistently, especially the ones that are growing really fast?
The biggest issues in terms of dupes, or
just
in general?
Data quality. Dupes is one big category. We all know. But apart from dupes,
it's really just I think it's just not enforcing the minimums. is
Okay.
missing data. Like it's crazy to think, right? We talk about this, but the number of instances that we first get into and identify that only 80% of the accounts have a country filled in is like the first step of just wanting to clear up duplicates and making sure that they're in the right and making sure that the accounts end up in the right territory. So that's like the number one pitfall. And the second one is really not coming back and being proactive about it. So we'll go through and we can like clean as much as you want, and we'll spend months and months cleaning up all your data, and then nothing was enforced up front. So as soon as we're done, the data is just continually coming into the
So,
system and it's missing stuff.
so yeah, that's like in a tub of dirty water, right? So you first spend all the time draining that water out, but if you've not fixed the supply source, you're going to be back to square one, and which is why it really is important to take it as a two-step process: defining the policy, then automating the execution of the policy, because it is not scalable to run this through manual checks, right? You will always end up with dirty water all over again.
Yep. And to be honest, like there'll always be manual stuff that happens, but by automating as much as you can or enforcing things up front, it's going to minimize the manual side, so that you're not having to hire 5 people to deal with the problem, and it's just one person that's doing it a couple hours a week.
Yeah. So while we're discussing this, Chris had a question, which is like one of the chat window. He's like asking about data SLAs between departments, right? And basically holding departments accountable for data that they own, right? So I think of it is that it's not an SLA that you can have, but you can expect what a minimum data is required by. Goes back to who's creating data for in that object first, and then what are the common minimums we need for that. That whether it's accounts, opportunities, lead, contacts, you name it. That you got to assign an owner and put your AC model against each of this. Is that how you do that?
I mean that, but also like, yeah, you can assign SLAs, right? You can say like if kicking, let's say there was bad data in an account or a contact, and it just went back and forth between a couple people, and you're like, we'll deal with it later, and it was a problem in your company, and you wanted to get that fixed. Like defining SLAs would be helpful, but at the same time, you're going to need to have a lot of buy-in from everybody to go, okay, yes, we're going to stick to these things. If just sales ops is trying to say like, you need to respond to these problems within a week or whatever it is, you're going to have a tough time enforcing it, I think. But
so that brings up another great question, which is like, for me, it's the elephant in the room. Everybody knows there is a data problem in CRM, and everybody assumes that it's going to be someone else's problem later. Right? I was talking to an investor, and he said every board meeting that he goes to, it starts with this way: they hire a new VP of sales, and the first thing he says is, "Yep, our CRM data is really bad. We're going to clean it up, and we've got to get all these things done in order to hit it. It takes 6 months, go clean up the data. Another 12 months before things are happening, that VP of sales is gone. The new guy comes in and he says, yes, I have a plan. First, we need to clean up our data in CRM. It's really bad. And it's like it's a groundhog day. So everybody knows data is an issue. Nobody wants to solve it because at the end of the day, you could spend all your life cleaning up data. So that doesn't really help them. But it's important. So how do you build stakeholder alignment to drive an organization to sort of commit to a data strategy?
That is a great question. So I think it's definitely in multiple aspects, right? One is when you got to think about who you're talking to and what that person cares about. Ultimately, the VP of sales is going to care about are my reps spending time selling and not spending time dealing with duplicates? And so that's how you would build, consensus, or you would get buy-in from the VP of sales. Is you're like, hey, if we focus our time here, your reps are going to be able to spend X amount more time selling and less time squabbling over that account was actually in my patch, or it's actually in this patch, or wherever, right? And then you come back and you think about, okay, well, marketing, what does marketing care about? Marketing cares probably about attribution, making sure that these things happen. And if you've got 5 different duplicates, maybe the marketing activities are getting attached to one of the duplicate accounts, and it's not really getting attached to the right account that it's supposed to. And so you want to make sure that that's how I kind of would maybe build it with marketing. So I think it really starts with just finding out what they care about and making sure that and showing them that, like, really underlying data issues, or if we fix those, it would make your life and your job a lot easier to either report, manage, identify things in your world.
So 3 things, right? So I think it's a 3-step process. Like, first, yes, you're going to understand what they care about, right? You don't want reps fighting over accounts. You don't want reps, figuring out which account is the right account for them. So you try to rep productivity. You define the policies, and what I've seen, at least, it's most sales leaders don't mind having a policy. In fact, they like to have a policy. The problem comes is enforcing those policies, and today the way they are done through custom validation rules and everything is not a scalable process, because the admin has done it. He may take leave, he may go, and nobody has corporate information on what all the validation rules were. The go-to-market is always evolving, and next time you have 6 months later, you change your coverage model, you change your territory model. You may not need to go back and update all the policies and enforce it. It's a lot of work, and because it's a lot of work, then people they commit to a policy and then they ignore it conveniently, right? So I think thinking about how you can automate that enforcement of the policy is going to be key. I mean, that's what I've seen. I mean, I've seen you struggling initially with the manual data cleanups, and now when you have automated a lot of those policies, has life been a little better for you?
Let's just say cleaning data sucks. Oh man. I mean, yeah.
They all commit to a policy. They all commit to a policy, but do not, because they can't enforce it consistently, they just forget about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You always commit to writing it down, or you have it and then you put it in your bottom drawer and leave it there to rot, typically. As soon as you automate it, though, and this is a balance, right? You're not going to go in and enforce that every field on the account be filled in when it creates. This is part of that creation thing, and even data minimums. There might be a point where, like, well, you can create an account with just a name, but as soon as an opportunity exists, or there might be like some point in the sales process that you want to require fields to be filled in, right? And everyone sees this as like an opportunity moves across stages. You have reps fill in information, you put validation. Same thing with your data. So you'll want to identify that stuff. But that having that stuff automated and updated is going to be much better for you in the long run, because you're not going to be dealing with all the manual cleanups. And that also comes back to, I'll just touch really briefly on the third-party data source stuff. When you buy third-party data source, whether it's DMB, ZoomInfo, the million other things providers out there, it's really important to identify the mapping, but and how that is going to enrich into your fields, into the account, contact, lead, object, whatever that is, because ultimately that's a lot of automation that it takes care of for you. The manual stuff will be going through and finding out, well, why didn't this account match to our third-party data source, and finding and fixing those links. But that will help bring in a lot of information and remove a lot of that manual work.
Okay. So let me go a step further. A day in the life of Tyler, right? So a customer comes in right now and he says, Tyler, we need help with our data strategy. We don't have. What are the first things you look for in their instance to say how good or how bad things are?
I won't even. This is, you should close your ears, Dharmesh. I don't even look at the instance until we put a policy together. We put the policy together first, and
when you say we put a policy together, you have a framework for how
yep,
to write the policy down, and you sit down with the customer and say, "This is a policy." Yeah,
yep, we document it. We
okay.
document everything out, exactly what we've talked about, just the key aspects of this policy. And so we get that stuff down on paper and clarify these things, work with stakeholders to identify what needs to go in there. From that point, that document informs me to go, okay, well, the company really cares about websites, or the company cares about employee information. And that will then inform the analysis. So we go in and we're like, okay, let's now look at, how many of the 100,000 accounts, how many don't have this information, or how much of it is just wrong information. Like, you'll see, like, in like a street name will actually just be a bunch of numbers or a telephone number or whatever it is, right? And so identifying that stuff and knowing that stuff needs to be cleaned up would be the second piece. And that analysis is actually informed by what you define in your policy. Because if you don't care about, let's say, for me at least, if you don't care about the revenue number, the annual revenue number of a company, then why really spend the time and energy to go and try and clean that up?
So that part, right there, the fact that do I care about a particular field or not is again tied to how you plan to go to market, right? So you have to really, do you start with understanding the go to market strategy first, or you jump straight in?
Yep. You would use. Hopefully you have some sort of a go-to-market strategy to start with. If you don't, then you need to talk a little bit about what that might look like. And really, I would prefer that before you go into, let's say you don't have a go-to-market strategy, I would still prefer that we would talk a little bit about what that would look like, define the policy, look at the data, because as you're starting to do an analysis on, well, what should our go-to-market strategy be? How should we align reps, et cetera? You're going to want your data in the system to be clean, because you'll get inaccurate results in the latter half. But hopefully there's already something that exists, or there's probably something already working that, like, hey, we know these are the accounts that matter, or the fields that matter to us.
So I'll take a question that Chris Paris has posted over here, and that leads to the next step. So you've understood the go-to-market strategy, you've written down the policy with the customers, and this is their data policy. You've gone and done a gap analysis to say, like, where are the gaps in the current account data against that policy. Now, the next thing is, how do you automate the validation that is required to make sure that the policy is being applied consistently? What kind of tools have you used for driving that enforcement of policy?
That's a great question. Internally, we of course. Well, I don't like talking too much about Fullcast, but I mean, we have the dedupe tool that we've leveraged, which automates a lot of the duplicates unless it meets exceptions. Outside of that, there is the validation rules that we talked about in Salesforce. So putting those in place to enforce the fact that you just need to have data in the fields. And then the third aspect is really having the mapping, working with a third-party data source. I think at least that's what we've leveraged, is having this mapping between the two.
And when you talk about that, you mean the dedupe policy, the account hierarchy policy, all those policy tools are being enforced?
Yeah, I mean, account hierarchy is it is an important part of like a data policy, and really though, like, so I've written down, like, there's, let's say, 8 different aspects of a policy, and then there are what you would call other aspects. As a company grows, they're going to care more about. Some of those things are like ownership of accounts, segmentation, and then corporate families. And that's that policy that you're alluding to, is like, as you start to care about your corporate families and making sure those are up to date and maintained, then you'll want to automate. You want to make
Yeah.
sure that that's automated as data enters the system. You want to build those or clean them up, because as you clean up duplicates, you'll want to rebuild those hierarchies, etc. But if you're just going after SMB and you don't have a strategic or enterprise and you don't care about corporate families, then
Yeah. It's just really,
no need
so
to put that in place.
yeah. So I think to answer Chris's question is, for our perspective, the policy enforcement is happening through Fullcast itself, right? And we select the policies that we need. And policies for us, for those of you, we're talking specifically with data, but as we think about policies, policy is tied to data, policy is tied to the sales processes, policy is tied to how things get routed, right? Whether it's a lead or a contact, an opportunity. And those are all, again, we think of them as broadly. We might have another session, on why we think policy approach is the way to go about scaling ops. That's a totally different deep topic. But the 2-minute version of that is, as your go-to-market is evolving, your ops is consistently in the process of defining these different policies, whether it's routing, whether it's a process, whether it's data related, and then enforcing those policies. And today, the option is either you write custom validation rules or you automate them through a configurable wizard kind of an experience, right?
Yep.
And so we prefer the latter, because validation rules are hard to keep track of as a company continues to build. You just add a lot of custom code into Salesforce. So if somebody says, I want to get started with data governance process internally, would you be able to sort of recommend, guide, or share with them a format of how to write a policy?
Yeah. I mean, we can. I don't mind sending out the policy template that we have, and sharing that out with everybody. It's a constant work in progress, so I update it every time I go through this process. I pretty much make some change to it, because we've discovered either a better way to do it or a cleaner format, etc. But yeah, I have no problem sharing that out.
Yeah, I would say you should share that one out. And also, we had written a white paper on data governance, right? As you move from accounts to all the different objects. That's another white paper that is perhaps I would share it. If people are interested, you can ping me, and I'll be more than happy to sort of share that out.
I have that. I actually just did that other white paper too.
Yeah,
it's about like establishing an account data policy. It's I literally just wrote it.
I think that's a great one. So if you can share those two things, if anybody needs. Tyler's email is tyler@fullcast.io. So I will not get in the way of Tyler and myself and anybody who needs to sort of get access to that information. Any parting thoughts on how people should sort of think about it? I mean, the biggest piece that I think when I was in these roles was, anybody came up with me, hey, we have this data project, right? And I just to close my eyes and wince, because I'm like, this is a project that's going to take years and will not get me anywhere. So I think when we started thinking of policies, it was a different lens. But anything else that you want to share with people and how to approach this?
Two things. One, which we haven't talked about, but I'll just mention as a really important part of your policy, is set targets, data quality targets for yourself. We want to see a match rate between our third-party data source of 95%, and set those up as audit reports and check those and make sure, and that's good target, so you have like something to achieve, right? And that kind of leads into, like, it might seem insurmountable, but as you just chip away at this stuff, you actually make a lot of progress, and baby steps turn into 95%. And then the second piece is this is the process that I follow with every customer. It seems to work fairly well, and it starts with policy. So define the policy. Then once that's done, analyze. So analyze your data problems, figure out where the gaps are. Next is clean. And when I talk about cleaning, it's standardizing, removing wrong information from the fields, filling in the empty fields, deleting junk accounts. Don't get to dedupe yet, but you'll clean. Then you'll enrich. Take your third-party data source, get data into the accounts to enrich it. Then come and do the dedupe, because now you've got all this information into the accounts. So now you'll identify your duplicates. You'll want to govern, which means controlling access, audit the data, review the policy, talk to the stakeholders, have that conversation. And then the last one is maintain. So continually enrich those accounts as they come into the system, update information, set up a flag for review, which is basically an ability for reps to flag things to say like, hey, this isn't right. So you could actually manually clean that data.
That's a very important point, because they are the ones on the ground. They know the latest information.
Yep. And then the last thing is just continually dedupe. But that is the perfect process. 100%. Nothing's wrong with that ever.
that is a framework. Well, thank you, Tyler. This is super useful. And for folks who joined us, right, if there are topics that are top of mind for you as you think about, hey, I have a strategy that I need to get enforced, do let us know. If you need to go deep into some other aspect of data, happy to chat about that as well. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.